I want to thank you all for coming, and we're really thrilled you're here. And I am going to ask for your indulgence while I read a little bit. But, okay, so today, Victoria Suescum's talk is entitled Latina, and the A is an @ sign, so you have to think about that. Art and Identity Across Generations. Her talk supports our special exhibition, right here, Identity, Victoria Suescum and Michael Peterson. And identity, as you'll see on the side there, it's the English word, but it has the Spanish exclamation marks on both sides. So I know we've all heard of Spanglish or mixing of cultures, so I think that's what we're trying to get at there, and I know that you'll talk a little more about that. The paintings and drawings on view explore the emotional and physical realities inherent in the multiple heritage of both artists. Victoria Suescum and Michael Peterson. Victoria was born to Panamanian parents and moved permanently to the U.S. in 1988. She's lived the experience of a Latina immigrant for 28 years. Raised in Texas's Rio Grande Valley and son to a Caucasian father and an Hispanic mother, Michael Peterson, who is not with us tonight, but you'll talk a little about his work, is the product of differing but equally influential cultures. This exhibition grew out of a mentoring relationship between Victoria, an internationally exhibited artist established in her career, and Peterson, who received his M.F.A. from the University of Texas at San Antonio in 2013. Consequently, in addition to its cultural perspectives, the exhibition is also an exploration of the relationship between two generations, which gets us back to the title of this talk. And now a little more about Victoria Suescum. She is, as I mentioned, an internationally exhibited artist based in San Antonio, Texas. Her exhibition highlights include official participation in the 50th Venice Biennale, as well as in the exhibition Cross Currents Contemporary Painting from Panama, 1968 to 1998, which opened in New York City's America Society, and the exhibition Del Centro a la Isla at the Casa de las Americas in Havana, Cuba. Victoria earned her M.F.A. from the University of Texas, San Antonio. Hold on. And her B.A. from Wellesley. Very different places. She also attended the New York Studio School and the Wesleyan University program in Paris. She is currently Associate Professor at Austin Community College. I want to also give a shout out to two other guests with us tonight, Dr. Elizabeth D. Moyer and Dr. Michael C. Powanda, who introduced us to Victoria's work, as well as that of her husband, who is in the shadows over here, Kent Rush, who's a printmaker, and whose support, the Powanda support, has been instrumental in so many of the projects we do here in building our collections and in incredible moral support, for which I am deeply grateful. Their selections from their collection and recent gifts are on view upstairs in our Morris Graves Gallery in the exhibition The Faces of War, Gabor Peterdi and his contemporaries. So take a look at that if you haven't yet. But for now, let me say again that we are thrilled that you are here, and please join me in thanking and welcoming Victoria Suescum.
Thank you very much for attending. The art world is like a coral reef, and we need all the parts of a coral reef for it to remain healthy. And that includes the art lovers and observers, because of what use would it be if I made it and no one saw it. But anyways, I would like to also thank Joanna Season Wine and Jill Hartz for their help in coordinating this exhibit. I would like to thank Debbie Williamson and Angela Kennedy for their support, and special thanks also to Drs. Elizabeth D. Moyer and Michael C. Powanda for their generous patronage. You have already covered some of the territory, so a lovely introduction, and it will allow me to just jump right in Indeed, identity is a word in, not normally a word in Spanglish, but there we have it, a brand new one. And that is, I think, a keystone to the exhibit. And may I just invite you to come over closer and let's look at loncheria. Loncheria. Loncheria La Sirena, wow. Which this is, as you know, obviously Spanglish is a fusion of two languages, and loncheria is just a wonderful Spanification of lunch. Okay. And then there's a lot of wonderful things that are fused together in this painting. So not only do you have Loncheria La Sirena here, but then what is she offering? And it says, especialidad de la casa, pescado frito, specialty of the house, fried fish, but she is offering you a fried chicken, not actually a roasted chicken, a rotisserie chicken. So chicken of the sea. I do not know why, if their specialty is fish, she's not serving a fish platter, but there you have it. And then, in addition, I actually believe that the male consumers of this restaurant probably would like to have her for lunch. So she's kind of a delicacy too of the seas. And anyways, and so there you have a great big pitchfork, Poseidon and all that, but it's also something you eat with. And her little, what do you call those little companions that accompany gods and goddesses? All the little fish are, flopping about. And we have another word in nice Spanglish over here, cóctel de camarones, and cóctel is it's a Spanification of cocktail, which in its turn comes the word cola de gallo, is the English version of cola de gallo in Spanish, which was a mixed drink in Mexico. And then it turns out that when I looked up cóctel in the dictionary, the correct accent is on the O, but since everybody says cóctel, I further Spanglishized it by putting the accent on the wrong letter. And so the other ways in which you see a fusion of cultures is that the images that you see on the walls here are from a lot of different places. So some are seen in Mexico, some are seen in Panama, some are ones that I sort of make up myself as I go along. I add little bits and pieces of several types of signage. And I will talk a little bit more about that signage in a moment. Let me see here. Oh, I have to tell you that I have another version of this cóctel de camarones because, in fact, in the real world, when I saw it, because these, of course, deteriorate in the real world. They're from storefronts in Spanish-speaking portions of the Americas, and they're outside, barbershops and restaurants and fruterias and places, shops, basically. And so they will disappear within 5 years. But this one actually on top said steak. So so another Spanification of an English word, but I love it that they included the E because you can't pronounce an S straight up in Spanish. So you have to aspire. So you go steak, yo quiero un steak. And so they wrote it that way, steak, but then the images of shrimp. And I hear, when I hear Spanglish, I love it. I feel a kinship that is very special. It's a recognition, it's a feeling of community, and it reminds me that throats will strain to form, to adopt the form that makes it possible for us to speak a language. So when a person says steak, it is because they cannot say steak, because the muscles required for steak are different from steak. And when I first got here in 1988, my whole face would be exhausted. It would be tired. I didn't know a face could get tired. But it was because for the first time I was speaking English for so long all day. And I didn't know why my face was tired at the beginning. Interestingly, I don't know if I should stay here for a moment since we are here. Another strong thing about the culture that is being communicated in these images is food. We are tied to our food. We have our comfort food. So chicharrones are definitely a Latino comfort food. And when I say Latino, it's the Latin with that A that you put on a web, what do you call it, on your email address, The @ because that way it can be Latino or Latina. It isn't, so I'm saying Latinx. But anyway, so chicharrones are our comfort food. Little taquitos are comfort food, definitely. And I am delighted to find that these images, which I originally discovered in Panama growing up and which surrounded me, this was my museum, a museum of the streets. I did not know about, you know, the Met. I hadn't been there. I didn't grow up with access to all this fine art. And so these are also you could call them my comfort images as well as my comfort foods. But I am delighted to find that they appear also in American soil. So just as I have traveled here, the images too are found here and in Spanish-speaking neighborhoods. And so truly the images here are both international, including the United States.
Can I admit my ignorance? What are chicharrones? Obviously they're made of pork.
Yes, I love it that you knew that. That's great.
But the picture helps.
Well, you know, chicharrones are bacon rinds when they're deep fried. And they get all nice and puffy and crunchy. And so they're like our potato chips, you know?
Oh, that crunchy.
Yeah, they can become very, very light, very crunchy, or they can be really tough too. I like the crunchy ones. But what I love about that is the whole idea. I mean, you can't come up with this, you know? A pig auto promoting that you eat it is just crazy, and it's so optimistic. And then you know that the ones that are come in the Americas are those hogs with a stripe down the back. I mean, so this is actually a person really knew their pigs, the person, and the ones that you eat. Yes. And I have chickens, I have roosters, I have ganado cebu. I do have a lot of other images of animals, you know, that you find, and they're outside butcher shops. So here you see a butcher shop, a restaurant, a seafood restaurant, a fruteria, and this is actually outside also a fruteria where they sell corn on the cob. And this one goes back, okay, so this was my museum, the Museum of the Streets growing up. And one thing is that they are rarely signed. They are undervalued, they're overlooked. People will walk by them, they will consume them as advertising, but they won't appreciate them as fine art. And so I am deliberately, I'm loving them, and being an artist, I'm putting them in this setting, giving them that recognition. But one thing that is interesting is that when they repaint a wall, they will want to change the color of the wall, but they won't want to get rid of the image. And so hence you see the little halo, and this would be the original color of the wall, and then maybe they painted it pink and they stay away from the image. So if you see little halos, that's partly what it is.
What are they sprinkling on that corn?
Okay, they are sprinkling chili, and it's cream and chili and on this roasted corn on the cob, and oh, it's delicious. It is so good, so good.
We grow this back home.
The corn?
Yeah.
And you know, the corn is a little tougher in Latin America too, but here in the United States it's very juicy. So anyways, this is American corn. What I wanted to mention about language, since that's kind of the subject here for now, is if we can turn around. I talked about my face being tired because I had to speak English for so many hours on end, and Spanglish, and how that I feel very linked to Spanglish. This is work by Michael Peterson, and what's interesting is that from his name you would never guess that he was Latino, but in fact he's browner than I am. And but what's interesting for him is that being born to a Caucasian father and a Hispanic mother, a Mexican mother, in the photographs he tells me with his brothers, his half-brothers with his father, they're all 6 foot tall and blue-eyed, and so he'll be the only brown one in the photograph. But when he goes to be with his mother's side of the family, he'll look like them, but he's the only one that wasn't brought up by the grandmother, and therefore he doesn't speak very good Spanish at all. He can understand a lot, but he can't really speak it, and so he feels isolated from them. Therefore, he doesn't quite belong in either one, and that is key. This whole business of you have 1 foot here and 1 foot there, you're straddling cultures, you're assimilating. You know, so the way that expresses itself in his work is that he will Google a name. And so in this case, it's Richard Ramirez. And then imagine a deck of cards. Suddenly you have 5 of them, because you Google Richard Ramirez images and you will see 5 different Richard Ramirez's. And so just as one cannot make assumptions about Lee Michael Peterson from his name, you cannot make assumptions about Richard Ramirez from his name. And, and it is a really great image because it does 2 things. On the one hand, it points out how different Richard Ramirez's can look, and indeed, every single one of these faces could be Latin Americans. When you think of Latin America, think, you know, a melting pot as well. Crisol de razas, they say, you know, like, I don't know how to translate that. Anyways, but on the other hand, and the other thing that they are is they're all from, they're very different you know, ancestries, but they're also very different in their careers. So we cannot make assumptions about what job Richard Ramirez might actually occupy. It might be a person in uniform, it might be a person in a suit, it might be a person who doesn't wear a tie. Okay, here we have the Holy Family. And so he has actually Googled a Mary Christ and a Joseph Christ. So we have Mary and Joseph Christ here on the left with their son, and I have to look up the son's name because I'm not positive. This is Jesus Rodriguez. And if you know anything about Jesus, it's a very popular name in Mexico, and you call them Chuyis for, you know, that's their nickname. And so, and lo and behold, Chuy, I'm saying Chuy, I don't know if Lee would say Chuy, but Chuy has that farmer's tan. You know, so you don't expect an image of the Christ to have a farmer's tan. And so it's just wonderful how he, and there is actually a person that looks like that whose name is Jesus Rodriguez. And so, you know, these are real. You can Google them and find them. And so let's see, what else did I have to say? Well, what I wanted to add was that when I went to college, I was then introduced to Western mainstream art, and all of a sudden it was very confusing, and there wasn't only a Monet, on top of it there was a Manet. You know, it's like there's 2 of them. Oh my goodness, and I couldn't tell them all apart, and I thought I will never catch up. And it took some time for me to come to value, because I had, growing up around these images, not valued them either. I had just absorbed them. And so I grew to value them, and I realized I don't have to catch up, thank goodness. And some of these, and I'm just going to go back to talking about my images because of course I know more about them, but if we look at the Cóctel de Camarones here, you will, these, just like paleo, camarones, there you go.
Oh, that is a French word for
Really?
Cameroon.
Oh, Cameroon, okay, so I don't know where Camarones in Cameroon, I don't know if they come from the same root, but
Maybe.
it could be, So what I wanted to mention is that, you know how people sometimes think that like Paleolithic art, oh, that it's rustic and that the artist didn't really know how to make images very well, but it turns out, of course, that they were experts and there was a style and they developed over the millennia, and you can see the distinctions and the fact that they made large bellies and skinny little legs and tiny little heads was actually on purpose. Well, it turns out that there is a style to this pop art, to this vernacular that I love so much. For example, the proportions are awkward. They're improbable, actually, is a better word. And so you have these gigantic goblet with these tiny little shrimp. And you will always see a little spoon tucked in, no matter if it's a sundae that they're advertising, but you know, make sure you can eat them, because it is for the eating, of course. And then the colors are, sometimes they look like they're just out of leftover paint buckets. And the linear perspective is often confused, and so there isn't any linear perspective in these particular images, but you will see that it is an attempt at linear perspective, but it's been hybridized. And it is perfectly acceptable to the consumers of these types of images, of this type of vernacular, to see this confused linear perspective. And then something else that's really, really popular among this signage is the drips, because of course it's pretty hot. in Latin America, and it's pretty hot in San Antonio as well. And you know, this is condensation. This is telling you this is a cool, refreshing thing to eat. And so the drips are a big deal. And you'll see them on beer bottles, you know, you'll see them on lots of goblets. And then shrimp cocktails are very, very popular. You will see many versions, and I've painted many versions of them, including one of this identical one in a smaller version on paper. And on top, the real painting, it doesn't say cóctel de camarones on it. It says steak. Did I already say that? And so it's like, what is the steak doing advertising shrimp? It's like the mermaid you know, the specialty of the house being fish, advertise, you know, bringing you some chicken. The words and the images don't jive necessarily. What do we have in common? Why Lee Michael Peterson and I in the same room together? Well, we do have some things in common. Just as he feels awkward, you know, in his two worlds sometimes, he deliberately draws people awkwardly. He deliberately selects people who are not glamorous, and he picks famous names. And so some of his images, and some of them may be up on that multiples over there. You'll have to read what the names are. I don't know what he brought. But he has James Holmes, who is a porn star. There's a John Wayne. And there is another large painting of this type, which has the three Supreme Court justices, Kagan, Sotomayor, and who's the third woman? Ginsburg, of course, duh. And so what he does is he is validating, and this is what he told me, is that he is validating the people who are not known. He is validating the people that might be overlooked, just as I am painting images that are overlooked. And mine are awkward on purpose because that's what I love about them. I am not correcting them. And if we look at the mermaid, one last thing I might add is you'll note that actually the mermaid and the Richard, so you can become schizophrenic here, the Richard Ramirez's have in common is the elbows are in the wrong places. And that's not because I don't know how to put an elbow in the right place, but because I adored that about the original one. And then it's very difficult to draw faces, and people who don't know how to draw a face will often think, aha, I will draw it in profile. I will only have to draw half of the face. It will be easier. But no, it is actually far more difficult, and then they don't know how to get the nose right. And all of a sudden, it just becomes like a little hook. And and then, you know, hands are really difficult. And so again, it's not that I couldn't paint you a hand, but I mean, I'm painting these wonderful claws that are quite dangerous, you know, these manicured talons that she has. You may not want to get too friendly with that mermaid. And another reason for having Lee Michael Peterson and I in the same room is because of the issue of generations. We are separated by a generation. I am about 30 years older than him, probably. And he grew up with computers. I didn't. I find my images in actual neighborhoods, in local markets. He finds his images on the World Wide Web, in the virtual world. And so that is a gigantic difference right there. Another very interesting thing about the generations is that I am, even though I was born in the United States, because I was raised in Panama, I do feel like an immigrant. I did come to college, but then I went back, but when I moved here in 1988, I came with one suitcase. I was fleeing a dictatorship. I came as an immigrant. I mean, I really, there was so much of the culture that I could not comprehend. And some conversations I understood 10 years later what people meant, because I took everything literally. I didn't get the idiomatic expressions. But anyways, so I have that immigrant experience, whereas his grandmother immigrated. So I don't know, does that make him second generation or third generation Latino? I'm not sure how to count the generations. But so his experience of being Latino is different than mine. And his is it's like when you see the 5 Richard Ramirez's, it's the identity of Richard Ramirez is fluid. And his identity, Lee Michael Peterson, brown person, is fluid. It's ambiguous. They float together. You know, whereas mine is more culturally anchored. And it's interesting because even if you were to conduct research about our work, you would also find that there is a generation of differences between the books that you would, in which you would look, in which you would read. So for example, to learn more about my work, you might want to go to Lucy Lippard's book, published in 1990, titled Mixed Blessings, New Art in a Multicultural America. And if you do get that book, it's excellent. Mixed Blessings, Google that, you'll get it. And what I actually love about the book is on this, it has all these little sidebars, and it tells you all these little stories of people like me and their experiences of what it's like to arrive into a new world and what is it like to be assimilated. And what is, for example, I wasn't Hispanic until I got here and I was told so. I didn't know that. And now I have been here for so long that I actually do not, when I go back to Panama, my friends laugh at me because I make the most ghastly mistakes, you know, smile at the wrong times, you know, shake the wrong hands at the wrong time, you know, catch the eye of a person on the street and then they come forward and I'm like, you know, no, I didn't mean to catch your eye, you know. And so I invite interactions that are not necessarily ones that I wanted to encounter. That's just one way in which I don't quite fit back in seamlessly. Another book and of course I read Lucy Lippard's book when it came out. There's another book, Julia Alvarez, 1991, How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accent. It's a novel, it's wonderful. That's another book that would, if you read it, you would understand my work. And it was also published in 1991. Now, if you want to understand Lee's work, you want to go read Eleanor Hartney, and her book is called Art and Identity, and it was published in 2013. And one of in Eleanor Hartney's words, she says, I want to make sure I don't get them wrong, that she says that there has been in this time period an evolution from art that celebrates specific identities towards art that posits a more fluid definition of identity. And if you were to read her book, you would see examples of artists like Nikki Lee, who inserts herself in different communities for 6 weeks, embeds herself in them, and so she is of Asian heritage, but she will appear to be of Latino heritage or African American heritage, or I don't know what other, all sorts. She embeds herself in these communities. So her identity is fluid, and so we hear about gender fluidity, and well, here you have identity fluidity. And one last thing that I would like to mention is that. Again, if you were to read Lucy Lippard's book, you might run into Guillermo Gomez Peña's quote, in which he talks about being bicultural, and he says that I don't know where I have it now, but that what is the difference between biculturalism and cultural schizophrenia? And so for someone who has moved here, it does sometimes feel like, I'm not schizophrenic, so I don't know if that's what it would feel like, but that's what Guillermo Gomez Peña says. And so I find it just truly interesting that both the sources that you would explore to learn about our work and the issues that are taking place in our work and our actual age are all separated by generations. Hence the title for the exhibit. And lastly, if you look over there, those are names, you will find again there are people who actually bear those names, but they don't look like that. Those are other people that also bear those names. And then mine is Faustino, and Faustino is actually from a painting from a shop that sold clothing. So it has nothing to do with Faustino's name, although people it is lovely that a person who is very humble should be called, I actually do know a Faustino, which comes from Faust, which comes from, isn't it Wagner, I think? but it's some great European dramatic music. And so I do know a Faustino who is very humble and wears a stripy T-shirt, and so hence my Faustino. So you see two images, but they're about very different things that are similar, but about very different things. Thank you so much for coming in. I don't know if there are any questions. Thank you. Thank you.
So one of the, and we'll send this around just so that your questions are recorded. But I'm wondering, because your works are painted to, to look like the works that are on the street and whatever, I'm wondering how, say, the academy, whether you've had issues with that as a teacher, as a professor, and with others. Do they get this? Do they know that you can paint well and all of that?
I think I lose the respect of my students because they don't know that I'm doing it on purpose. And just as the paintings are overlooked in the real world, I think that it takes putting them in a setting like this for people to actually look at them. And one thing that I'm doing to emphasize that transition from public to institution is that I'm using matte acrylic. I have to special order those paints so that they're not glossy, so they do look more like the wall paintings.
Right, okay.
I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, no, I think so. And my other question was, do you know any of these painters? Have they seen what you've done?
I do not know them, but I think that might have to be my next task, because I was telling you about the styles and the drips. Well, one year there were like 3 pink toilets in different towns, some in the countryside, some in the city. So obviously one painter who thought, hey, a fancy pink toilet, it must be pink to be fancy, was hired several times. I mean, people liked the way he painted them. And so I could have, pursued that. Right now, there is somebody painting 8 balls from billiards with flames. Last year I saw one. This year I saw one with a pair of lucky red dice. So and you know what? I went by the bar where I saw the first one, and now I need to go back and I need to go and see if I could ask, who did you hire? What is the name of this painter? Because in the decades that I have of photographing these works, I have seen maybe 2 signatures. Most people do not sign their work. And so I make sufficient changes, I hope, that I'm appropriating but not stealing, I'm not taking credit for somebody else's work. But, and I do make, like the mermaid is based upon an image, but I made up the story a lot of. I did not make up the part about the chicken, though.
The lancheria.
I did not know. So here, for example, I put cóctel de camarones on it, but that's from another painting that did say
So
cóctel.
you've seen that.
Yeah.
And do these gentlemen know that they've been immortalized?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Not to my knowledge. They
Wondered
have
if
not.
They went back to the internet or not.
Right.
No. Okay. So open it up to other questions. Anyone have one that you would like to ask?
Yes.
Here, just.
The paintings that you base these on, are those from Panama or various countries in Latin America?
So they started out being from Panama, but then I was invited to go to Honduras for a conference and an art exhibit. And then people say, oh, you're painting this? Well, let me go show you some shoes. So they take me to a shoe shop. Wonderful shoes with crazy shadows. The shadows had nothing to do with the shoes. It was really funny, especially the high-heeled shoes. And so what happened is that when I would travel, people would show me the things. And so I did not know it, but it turns out that these images are to be found in Spanish-speaking portions of the Americas. And you will notice that I was very careful to say that they are growing in U.S. soil, because there is that dilemma that people say that they're Americans when they mean that they're U.S. But when I say America, I really do mean America. And I do mean the Americas, the 2 continents.
Thank you very much. Very interesting lecture. I do have a question about the colors.
Mhm.
You use like very, I mean, your paintings are very colorful.
Yes.
Like, I don't know, like so many colors. And whereas this person's, Lee's paintings are more like calm. And is it like, you said like two different generations, like paintings, right? But can it be compared as like, as a female and male paintings, like the colorful?
It could be that, and you know what else it could be? That there's what they call hot art and cool art. And my work is hot. And this is more mental, it's cooler. And so that also has to do with, you know, that in these days, cool art is what's hip. And I have deliberately learned how to paint. When I lay down a color doesn't exist by itself. It exists by what it's next to. So mine are hypered up because of what they lie next to. And the lighting in this room is really beautiful, and the colors are working very, very well, actually. We are actually seeing the colors that I intended. And it's lovely that you noticed that. So the juicy, pumped up yumminess is definitely hot. Yes.
This was a wonderful lecture.
Oh.
And your paintings are really, really beautiful. And my question is, what inspired you to become an artist?
I went to college and I signed up for microeconomics every single semester because I thought that's what you were supposed to do when you went to college, learn business or something. But then I could select one extra class and drop it after the first week. The other 4 classes, they would be drawing and painting and some art history class and some other thing, you know, history or English, Shakespeare or something. And those were so exciting. I would say, oh, I'll just drop the microeconomics and I'll take it next semester. I never took microeconomics. I made it all through college without taking microeconomics. Next thing I knew, I was taking extra courses, but that was in order to get a double major in art history as well as studio art. And then I took classes that I always took, it has the same name, which it was they would invite an artist with a different specialty. So I took classes on Persian art, on Chinese art, and what I did not get, however, was a single class in Latino art because that wasn't offered. That was not offered. There wasn't a single one. It was Latin American, Caribbean, South American, nothing. Not even pre-Columbian. So there was nothing for me to recognize. And it was only when I went back home that I realized, here I am. I recognize, and my scalp is tingling as I say that. I recognize myself. And I hope that if you do travel to Latin America and notice these signs, that you will recognize me, that you will, or someone like me, and that you will know this is the world.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you for your questions. I truly appreciate them. As an artist, we work very, very hard, and when people don't ask questions, we go like, oh, they didn't care. Oh, did they like it? You know, vanity kicks in. But
So where did you learn about Frida Kahlo?
I learned about Frida Kahlo in the United States. She became popular in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so now, in Latin America, Frida Kahlo is the big thing, but of course there are several movies out and, you know, all this publicity. But I think it was the hype in the United States about Frida Kahlo that made her known even to us. Because of course she's from Mexico and I'm from Panama, like, I don't know who Frida Kahlo was. I'd never heard of her. So my education about art really was in the streets.
And when I think about it, I don't know that I know any Panamanian artists, visual artists, other than you.
Well,
You know?
yeah.
I don't.
It's very difficult to make a living as an artist in Panama, and so there are many, but they cannot make this brave work. They cannot go off the ledge like I do, because then they won't be able to survive
Right. Yeah.
in the market. But there are some wonderful, wonderful artists.
I just want to say that I haven't been to Panama or Honduras, but I have been to Mexico, and I feel like I'm in Mexico and I see those colors, because those are the colors of the streets. I mean, the buildings are painted in those colors. I mean, that was a long time that I went there, but the colors are kind of universally hot.
And you know something? As you speak, I see you smile. And when I see a smile, I know you got it.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Anyone else? Other comments?
Since you came here in '88, so thinking about multiculturalism, now we're hearing a lot about post-identity. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you feel in that time period, both responding to a local context but also exhibiting internationally, if you feel that we, the broad we, see each other more clearly, understand each other more clearly today as opposed to in the 80s and before.
Okay, I recently heard a young female artist from San Antonio post on Facebook, "If I hear somebody else say the word identity, I am going to throw up." And I just thought, that is privilege. That is privilege speaking, because for my entire life, I will be living that, and I have no choice. It's the part of life in which I have been shoved. And so this post-identity, some people might be able to go there. Mm-hmm. But I don't have that choice. I don't have that choice. And now, your question was very complex. So I don't know what the other part was.
I guess if you feel that as a Panamanian American woman living in South Texas, that
am I understood more?
Yeah, are you understood better after so many decades of sort of hearing about Latin America, exhibiting, Latin American art, teaching it, writing about it, that it's grown here in the U.S. Do you feel that you are better, more clearly understood?
I think I'm clearly understood by for example, people from San Antonio or from Mexico will respond to the taquitos. I have had exhibits with food, which is basically a Latin American menu. The plantains, but then aguas frescas. Some of them are more from one country than another, and I have 3 aguas frescas, 3 different flavors. Well, the director of a museum in where was it that we went on the border, Kent? Where we exhibited with Juntos? He has disappeared. In El Paso. They fell in love, the director fell in love with one of the aguas frescas because when she was a child, she would go with her grandmother to buy, and that was the flavor she bought. So people have super strong ties, emotional ties. And so my work is not more understood by people who don't have that vínculo, that link, to emotionally, either to the food culture or to the beauty parlors. And now the tire repair shops, I think more people would have. I do have tire repair shops, and they would probably be more easy for people to access. Mm-hmm. But what I am doing right now, I think that we have doors through which we can access art. And as it turns out, I'm going to tell you what my new plan is. If you have 2 minutes, can you stand for 2 more minutes? Okay, so I discovered that I was painting lots of cups of shrimp and cups of fruit and sundaes with a little strawberry on top and margaritas and I had all these cups, and I realized, oh my goodness, the tarot cards have cups. And so I invite a friend who reads tarot cards, and I ask her, what else am I painting? Aha, well, you have wands or staffs. So these are my Latin American, there's nothing more European than a tarot. Manet and who else? Monet. I said Mano. Money and money, eat your heart out. I can do it. I can do it too, you know. And so these are my staffs. And there are major arcana. So this could be the goddess. And it turns out that one of the major arcana has 4 animals. So the pig would fit beautifully in one of them. And so a project that I have for February is to actually create, some of it might be created digitally because I can't possibly create all of them. But reciprocity between my images and the tarot cards, have tarot card readers come and they will be using my deck to read, and then hopefully they will fall in, if they get a card, they might fall in love with it, and that might be another way to access the images so that the people will fall in love or have a strong link because they've had their cards read. And that, you know, I love it because that's sort of multiculti also, right? It's a transgression of this typically European, you know, type of cards. So that's where I'm going, and hopefully it'll open new doors, and maybe people will understand it. But when I explain it, people get it.
Okay, well, thank you, Victoria.
Well,
thank you for enriching our lives and making it brighter.
Jill, thank you so much for having me here. Truly, it is an honor.